Hello and welcome to everyone who is rounding out the first day of NAAEE's conference. We just finished the last concurrent session, and before you go for the day and really sleep and absorb all of the information that you've gathered, we have one last guest for you that I'm so excited to talk to. This is David Zandvliet, and he's going to share with us a little bit more about the presentation that he shared in the research symposium that took place last Thursday, and a little bit more about the work that he's doing. But for those of you who are just now tuning in, we have been doing these different conversations throughout the day, and we'll continue them through the week. So glad to have you joining in, and we will add them to our YouTube channel so you can catch up on everything you missed. But really, this is meant to just be a chat between colleagues who ran into each other while at the event this year. So I'm so glad, David, to have you and have the chance to talk to you today.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. Really nice to meet you. Thanks for inviting me for this session. And yeah, I'll just briefly introduce myself. I'm a professor of environmental education at Simon Fraser University, which is located in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. So that's part of the North American part of NAAEE, as we say.
That's
So
right. It's on the
I
map.
have other hats that I wear. I'm also the director of the Institute for Environmental Learning, which it's a regional center of expertise that was chartered by UN University about 15 years ago. And so we have a broad partnership among different post-secondary institutions here and our Ministry of Education and Childcare and, various other NGOs and community partners here in British Columbia. So we shared a collaborative project at the research symposium. So
Yeah.
that's another hat that I wear. And then the third and most recent hat for me is I have a UNESCO chair with a topic of biocultural diversity in education. And this overlaps with my research in that we are really interested in marrying Indigenous knowledge and pedagogy with environmental education and
Mhm.
environmental learning processes. So those are the hats I wear, and I'm happy to chat about any or all of those topics. So
I love it. And it sounds like you keep busy enough. Those are a lot of big moving parts that you're participating in, but it sounds it sounds amazing. And I know that you've got some things that are just now kind of coming to your literal doorstep that we get to talk about too. But before we go in too deep, let's talk a little bit about the presentation that you did at the research symposium. And I'm pretty sure folks can see in the conference app what the topic was. But would you talk a little bit to us just about sort of what the presentation was about and sort of what your goal was in sharing that information?
absolutely. So so the topic or the title of that session was "What is Environmental Learning? A Model for Decolonizing Our Practice." And I shared that with my institute co-director, Shannon Leddy, who's an Indigenous Métis scholar from the University of British Columbia, our, so far evil competitor university across across the city. And we've been friends for decades and work
Mm.
well together. So I was excited to share this document literally came from our government printer this week. um, and so we got to share a little bit about the process that created that document, which was really an action research methodology. Um, I was the lead writer for the previous document that was called Environmental Learning and Experience. And so we shopped that old document around for a process of about 2 years to say, how could we improve this document? What's missing? What should we keep? What should we get rid of? And we talked to practitioners from all around BC, British Columbia, but we really prioritized consultation with Indigenous
Mm.
peoples this time. So actually, the very first, the middle, and the last consultation of about 37 consultations that we did over those 2 years was with Indigenous colleagues, and they really shaped how the document is. So one of the outcomes, and I call this environmental seeing, um, is one of the themes was that not only do we want experiential forms of learning and getting out into the community, but to also use a two-eyed seeing framework, which doesn't have a hierarchy over Indigenous and Western knowledge, but puts those two next to each other as a holistic lens to view environmental issues with. And we've actually taken the edgy step, like this is why I really love, you know, this kind of model to share. We've actually formatted the document in that way. So, when you open the document, it's not possible to just see a Western perspective on an issue. On the left side will be an Indigenous perspective on that issue. On the right side is a Western perspective. And
Wow.
why we titled the document "What is Environmental Learning" is it's really a guided inquiry. The outcomes of our framework will look entirely different depending on who you are and where you live and what you're doing there. And so I'm really excited about this model because it's really like a process inquiry into community. And so teachers can take this and it's like it walks them through some steps of here's some people you need to talk to, here's some questions you need to ask. And of course, the answers in your community are going to be very different than if you were living in Vancouver, where I live. If
Hmm.
you live on Vancouver Island or Victoria, or if you live in the interior of the province, your answers to what that question, what is environmental learning, of course, is going to be entirely different. Different culture, different ecology, different answer.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. And what a great idea incorporating it into the guide so that you're literally experiencing it the way that you've kind of broken it down.
Yeah.
Um, that sounds really powerful with the sort of the previous version that you really, intentionally made adjustments to and incorporated more either voices or sort of methods into. What was the biggest thing that you felt like needed to pivot or ended up pivoting between the two versions? Is it the two sort of the two-eyed seeing that changed for that,
Well,
or what was the big change there?
across the board, Indigenous perspectives, right? Like, so,
Yeah.
like we came up with three themes. So environmental seeing, um, environmental thinking, and
Mm,
communicating and acting. And so, in each of those themes, there's embedded Indigenous content within those themes. So, for example, um, I have mentioned the environmental seeing, but if you talk about communication and action, for example, in the Western world, like we're using a very typical Western model of communication right now. And an indigenous model would be to tell a story. And
mm,
we have like great scholars like Joanne Archibald, who's a Stolo scholar here that talks about story work and that indigenous stories have knowledge embedded in them, and some of them are actually living memories of things that have happened in the past. So with a topic like climate change, that becomes actually really important to access
mhm,
those kinds of stories. And it's a different worldview, but when you put those two together, we're richer for it, right? And there are also um, other ways that indigenous knowledge is shared that are not Western ways. So I think about Tyson Yunkaporta, who's an Aboriginal scholar from Australia, and his 8 ways pedagogy, and different non-oral ways through art and through maker kind of technologies and things that information is shared, mentorship and
mhm.
other ways of communicating. So it's powerful in
Yeah.
that way. And
Yeah.
then
Do you?
lastly, yeah, lastly, this notion of thinking, we Western
Mhm,
people often think, as individuals, whereas indigenous communities think as a collective. So there's a whole scholarship around what we call the 4 Rs and thinking in community and how you might make a decision that's different if you're thinking
mhm,
about the whole community rather than you as an individual person, right? Which is a very
mhm.
Western perspective.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of things that inclusion of indigenous knowledge, but
Yeah.
also modeling it on an inquiry. I
Mhm,
actually remember the moment it was an indigenous consultation, and I was teasing people. what are we going to call this document? Is it like an environmental education framework? Is it place-based education? Is it land-based education? And one of my
Mm.
Indigenous colleagues looked at me, I won't say he rolled his eyes around, but maybe a little bit. And he said, actually, it should be what is environmental learning because it's not as if you know the answer. And I
Yeah.
was like,
Oh,
whoa, ooh, that's edgy, and then like a little light clicked on for me, and then we when we pushed a little bit, he's like, well, it matters who you are, it matters where you
yeah.
are, it matters what you're doing. So that was really a key change for us to shift it into like a basically a guided inquiry rather than a
Hmm.
policy document, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
David, I have so many follow-up questions and things I want to ask. I know that this is just flowing throughout everything you've said so far, but for somebody who hasn't heard this before, can you explain what is lacking when we just approach it from sort of the Western perspective, and why the integration of Indigenous thinking is so important?
Right, right. Okay. Well, I like to tell a story because, one of
I
the
love it.
things I've been involved with, I do a field school in an archipelago called Haida. And, some people may have heard of that. It's across the Dixon entrance from the Alaska Panhandle. It's like pretty
Mhm.
northern British Columbia. It's pretty isolated. And, last year they were granted basically Indigenous title, the first time that has happened in the world because they have had literally the best case for Aboriginal title in the world. There's like 15,000 years of archaeological evidence that they've always been there. They have this very deep land ethic as part of their culture. And, being where it is, kind of 100 kilometers or 60 miles from the mainland, like literally they could be sovereign, right? And
Hmm.
so they are now. They're still within
Wow.
Canada. But, I think about if you were doing climate research in a place
Hmm.
like that and you were a Western scientist and you came with your instruments and you were there for the summer and you took your measurements about carbon dioxide and salinity in the ocean and land cover and whatever. And, I would mockingly say, wow, those are some pretty powerful instruments you have to like get the whole picture about what's been happening here for the last 15,000 years without actually talking to anyone who's been living here for like a
Hmm.
culture that has lived here for that long. And, from a biocultural perspective, they've had challenges, residential schools, um, you know, climate change, of course, now, um, you know, disease, colonization, and yet they're still there. So they must have made some good decisions around sustainability that allowed their culture to thrive and survive in that place. So, how arrogant would it be to say, well, we know about climate change in this place and we don't need to talk to the local people, and the culture
Hmm.
has no information to share with us? First of all, that would be like quite arrogant to make that statement and almost ridiculous, right? But
Hmm.
yet, that kind of decision is made routinely all over North
Hmm.
America, where Indigenous knowledge is like pushed down and not acknowledged, right?
Yeah.
And I'll share one other story about that because there is, when you go into the museum in Skidegate, there is this fantastical story about Seafoam Woman. And, it reads like a mythology and so on. And one of my colleagues, who's an archaeologist, this happened about 10 years ago. He was like, what if that's not a story? What if that's a living memory? Then, if we went out into the Hecate Strait about this many miles and we sent divers down, we should find evidence of this village that is mentioned in the story. And you know what? They sent divers down and they found a midden. And so that is a living memory, that story. And when I heard that, I was like, wow, now I'm convinced. I don't call it story anymore. I call it story work. This is,
Mm.
these are living memories. They're not verbatim. Sometimes we forget things, sometimes we forget the context, but there is knowledge in there, and we need to work actively to acknowledge that and benefit from it.
That is that is so powerful. Thank you for kind of walking through that and for those sort of examples. This topic, it has been growing and shifting, and I've even in the conference so far, I've been hearing people talking more and more about that sort of understanding, especially that assumption of I can come in with my instruments and my lists and my documents and my measurements of everything, and that's going to tell the story of what's happening. When really, that's a tiny fraction of one way to look at it. So that's really powerful. When you think about how educators might take this guide now that you have this new sort of refreshed but also deepened version of how these how these different things can integrate together. For you, when you think about an educator or a classroom or a course, what is your sort of ideal version of what this will become, or how this can actually impact how students are learning, teachers are sharing, all of that?
Right, right. You know, one, and actually I'm having a meeting about this in 2 weeks with a wide partnership of teachers and other academics that have been related to this document. But one of the things is, so we have these Indigenous content ideas, and we have, like we have frameworks within the document, and often, the constraining factors are new teachers that are coming into the field and are being indoctrinated into, like, subject specialist realms, like, oh, you're a science teacher, I can't teach Indigenous content, or, I'm a social studies teacher, sustainability isn't part of, and well, of course it is, and they need help and they need
Mm-hmm.
tools. So we call this the curriculum maps, and this we had a document like this some years ago with the old framework, but we are going to map these concepts out over the entire K to 12 curriculum fairly explicitly for new teachers, so they can say, "Oh, you're a science teacher and you're teaching grade 6. Well, have a look. This is where we think the opportunities are for you to teach about environment and about Indigenous knowledge. So why don't you start there?" And, of course, you could do more. That's one project we have planned, and that's like we're actively meeting about that. The other project is, we live in a digital realm, like this is a good example. We're talking
Mm-hmm.
and there'll be a video. And a lot of teachers access information now via multimedia. So we're trying to create some partnerships around the province and doing multimedia case studies of the framework in action. So as I
Great.
spoke about in the beginning, to say, oh, well, if you do this in the interior, it looks like this. If you do it on the coast, oh, it looks different. Oh, if you do it up in the north. And we've actually built 2 or 3 of these case studies, and we're going to create a little YouTube channel that's attached to this framework and try to cross-reference some of the concepts so that the teachers could watch a little video, see a teacher in action doing something in their local community, and maybe get inspired to read more about the framework and, learn about how to enact this in their own practice, in their own way, in culturally and
Yeah.
ecologically significant ways in their community, right? So
And I can
that's,
imagine that seeing that in action is can be a can be that boost of confidence, that some educators might need to say, I do want to include these principles, and seeing an example of somebody else doing it can really inspire.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
great.
Yeah.
So, oh yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, well, the other thing that we fought about as a team, because my team was half Indigenous and half Western, doing this document, is we were like, oh, you know, the way we lay out the document and the graphics in the document,
Yeah.
like the last document was very ministry looking, right? Like almost
Mm-hmm.
corporate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so we used Indigenous artists for all the graphics and everything in the document. And like it's very pleasing and visually appealing. And we realize, oh, that's actually part of communicating too. Like, yeah, there's text there for you to read, but
Mm-hmm.
actually, before you even get to the text, you're
Mm-hmm.
already formulating some ideas just looking at the graphics. Like, what is this going to tell me? Whose perspective is this? Is this something I want to read or not? Right. And, so paying attention to that other way of communicating in the aesthetic, appreciative,
Mm-hmm.
emotional realm is something we're paying a lot of attention to this time around as well. And even there's some politics involved there. So this is kind of significant. I don't brag about this too much when the ministry is in the room, but sometimes, like we have the ministry logo on the back. So this is
Ah,
endorsed by the ministry, which is important, but it wasn't led by the ministry. They didn't fund it. Our
yeah.
institute got the grant. We did all of this and we were careful to include them so that we would get their endorsement. But, sometimes when teachers get fed something from the ministry, it can be perceived as a very top down thing.
Yeah.
Whereas this was a real bottom up grassroots thing that ended up being endorsed by the ministry. So that's got some power to it. It's like, oh, the community holds this is ours, but the ministry agrees with us.
Mm-hmm.
So, politically, that has some power. So,
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So where do people get this? How do people find this? When is this becoming something that educators can access? I'm dying to know.
well, in the short term, I have a digital version I can share with anyone. So
Oh,
they
perfect.
just need to email me and I can send it to them. But in the longer
Okay.
term, we're redeveloping our website, which is for the
Oh,
Institute,
nice.
which is it's
Okay.
eco-learning.org. So people will be able to access that and download it from there. And our plans are that all the multimedia and everything will reside there eventually, and then other professional development opportunities for teachers and so on will be advertised there as well. So we're starting to get into micro credentialing and like other
Mm.
teacher professional development workshops through the institute that will leverage the partnership that we had. And the other thing I'd mention is that I was just at a conference in Japan, which is all of these regional centers of expertise. There's 100 and so on around the world that are chartered by the UN University, and we just won an award for this framework actually from UN University. Just last week, I was in Japan, and it was a bit of a surprise for me because they didn't tell me ahead of time that this was happening.
Oh,
So that was kind of
congratulations. Oh
yeah,
my
yeah.
goodness, that's amazing. That sounds like it sounds like it was going to be, this framework was really impressive to begin with, but the recognition that you received for it really, really says something. Wow, congrats.
Well, and I had invited my co-director and kind of presenter for the research symposium, Shannon
Mhm.
Leddy. I have to give a little shout out to her because, she's a Métis scholar, Indigenous scholar, and, helped fund some of the consultations that we did. And really, honestly, there's a saying that you often hear Indigenous educators say that is, very simple but quite complex to operationalize, and it's nothing about us without us. And I really take that to heart. If I didn't have an Indigenous colleague for this project, I couldn't, with any authority, be in this space and talking about this. So I give a shout out to Shannon Leddy, professor at UBC, and my co-director for the institute, because that was our goal all along when she stepped up to be a co-director of my institute here at SFU. She said, well, are you prepared to decolonize? And I was like, yeah, that's what we need to do. So this framework is just one piece, but it's an important piece. communities, I think. So
Hmm. Ah, well, that's amazing. I would love to keep hearing about this. We have just a few minutes left. Is there, David, is there anything else that I know you're busy, you've got the role with the UNESCO and things like that that you've kind of got on your plate as well. Is there anything else that you're working on right now or participating in that you're really excited about that you'd want to share while we still have a little bit of time?
yeah, it's funny because people will often tell me, oh, David, like you work at SFU, like which is our acronym for Simon Fraser University. People sometimes confuse it with FSU, which is Florida State, like a dyslexic thing there. But no, not FSU, SFU.
A little
And
different.
they'll be like, well, I have to correct them. It's like, no, I work for SFU. I'm rarely on campus because I do field schools and experiential learning. So my practice is like I have a field school in Haida Gwaii. I have a field school in Howe Sound, which is north of Vancouver. We don't set foot on campus like for the entire program. The program is place and field and land based. And I do international field schools in places like Indonesia and in Tanzania and in very soon in the Amazon as well. And these are university programs that are available for teachers to take, but they don't happen on campus, but they're for credit or they're micro credentials. And
Mm,
that's the part of my work that I love because in a lot of ways, this framework is really how I teach, right? And how I aspire to teach, so that everywhere that I work in the world, I get to work with Indigenous, knowledgeable others as a co-teacher. And what's exciting about that for me is that I'm a learner, because I'm like a professor with 27 years of experience, but really I'm a professional learner. I get to go
mm,
into these situations where I'm learning about a new culture or about a new ecology that's happening. And that's so exciting for me. And it's exciting for the students too, because you're modeling what is learning, right? That it's not just a snappy title for our framework. It really is. We have to model this for people so that they become lifelong learners. And even the same field school in the same location is never the same. Something is always new that's going on in the community. There's some issue, there's something that rippled the waters a little bit
mhm.
that we need to pay attention to. So it's always new learning.
Ah, that sounds absolutely incredible. I feel like this conversation, I should have said, tell me everything about your life, and you would have filled in this bouquet of experiences. And it's, I mean, you obviously are so passionate about it. I love that. I mean, that sounds like impactful work for you as someone helping to co-lead this, as the people who are participating, and then the folks kind of who are also co-leading. It sounds like it is just a really important experience for people. So that's that's amazing. David, I have to ask you as a wrap up to the NAAEE podcast, we always ask, what is the world you want? Hearing everything that you've talked about, I have a sense of maybe what goes into a little bit of that. But would you tell me what is the world you want?
Well, it's something I spend a lot of time thinking about. And when I applied for my UNESCO chair, I was like, what's the term that I'm going to use to describe this? And the term is biocultural diversity. And that's acknowledging that wherever you go, there are these like amazing interconnections between world cultures and world ecologies, and that that these things have co-evolved all over the world, and there's so much to learn from them. So the world I want is one that acknowledges the biocultural diversity and the power of having these multiple voices, and hearing those, because we are becoming a monoculture, right, of corporate kind of speak, right? And biocultural diversity is the exact opposite of that, looking at the incredible diversity of cultures and solutions that are out there for us to pay attention to for these sustainability problems that we see worldwide. These cultures have survived in place for millennia, so they have something to teach us, right? And we need to be listening more closely.
And it sounds like the work you're doing, what you've put together as a framework, it sounds like those are steps definitely on the way towards that. So fantastic. Well, David, thank you for this conversation. This has been lovely. I really appreciate the time that you've set away so that we can chat through this. And I'm so excited for this document to be available for folks. I'm excited to see what comes together on your website. It sounds like there's so much to learn and explore and put into practice and use to really help shape the world to incorporate more biocultural diversity.
Well, thanks so much for the conversation and the invitation, Carrie, and hope it's a great conference. Uh, and yeah, till next time.
Thanks so much.